Yeah.
Um, okay, let's start with the Middle East. It seems like a
Yeah.
lot of things going on
Mm,
that is kind of getting more and more tense and dangerous, I would say.
mm,
Now, the latest is of course the Hamas leader was assassinated by a bomb. I think, first of all, I think Iran need to do better with protecting. I mean, they kept on getting attacked, assassinated, and those kind of thing. But that's the latest one because it's not that long ago. I think Erdogan said something that got everybody nervous.
mm,
I think his word is there is no reason Turkey doesn't kind of like get in. It sounds lots of people interpret that like Turkey is ready to get into the conflict and possibly even attacking Israel, something like that. And of course, the Iron Dome misfired. It seems like Iron Dome misfired into the Golan Heights. Although Israel said that Hezbollah did it, but it doesn't seem like that Hezbollah has anything to do with it. But it doesn't matter.
mm,
Israel claimed that
mm,
Hezbollah did it, and they always saying, okay, Iran
mm,
backed the Hezbollah, Iran backed this and that. So,
mm.
and all these seems like a escalation, getting more and more dangerous in the Middle East. What's your take on all this?
I think this is the most dangerous moment in the Middle East since the current crisis began on the 7th of October. Now, the reason is related very much to the political events in the United States. I mean, the Biden administration, to the extent that it has been able to exercise any kind of restraining influence over the Israelis, and I think that they do not want the ascendant faction within them does not want a general crisis in the Middle East. They now have to contend with the problem that their authority has collapsed. Joe Biden is not standing for president of the United States. It seems that the foreign policy team around him, Blinken and Sullivan, are not going to be kept on by Kamala Harris if she's elected. Everybody knows that they are exhausted and discredited figures, so they carry no traction and no influence. And of course, the government that is moving to take advantage of this is Israel. And we saw that very clearly with the visit by Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington, which took place last week. And if you listened to his speech to Congress, it was an incredibly belligerent speech. I mean, he was talking about war, he was talking about conflict, he was harping on about Iran all the time. He was telling the Americans that, when we, fight together, simple thing happens, we win. If only it was that simple. But I mean, he talked in that kind of a way. And my own sense is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the hardliners in his government have been wanting to escalate the situation in the Middle East ever since basically the conflict really started to get going in October, following the Hamas attack on Israel. And they've been trying to expand the war and to expand it in a way that takes in Iran. So a couple of weeks ago, if you remember, they attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus. The Americans, the Biden administration, basically just talked with the Iranians. They were able to bring the situation under some sort of control. There were missile strikes by each side against the other, but it was kept under some degree of control. Now the Biden administration is out of the way. So the Israeli authorities, the Israeli government, are now using this event on the Golan Heights. And I'm sure you're right, by the way. All the evidence suggests to me that it was an Israeli missile. It's important to point out that the settlement which was hit is apparently a Druze settlement. So this is Arab Druze people. It's not Israeli Jewish
Yeah,
people.
were
So
killed. Yeah.
I mean that. So I can't see why Hezbollah would want to target a settlement like that. I mean that doesn't make any kind of sense. So anyway, so they've seized on that as a pretext to escalate. So they're now beginning bombing campaigns in earnest against Hezbollah. They've attacked a Hezbollah commander in Beirut, who they tried to assassinate and might have assassinated. And they have taken advantage of the deeply flawed and disorganized security that Iran has, and about which you're absolutely right. This has been a long, I mean, this has gone on for not just years,
Mhm.
but decades, that the Iranians have had official after official, scientist after scientist, person after person in Iran assassinated, probably by the Israelis, and they never seem to be able to sort out their security. It
Yeah.
suggests that their internal security systems are extremely disorganized and very inefficient, and that there doesn't seem to be anybody who is able to take control of the situation and sort it out. So the Israelis have taken advantage of that, killed the man who I understand is the nominal leader of Hamas, who was attending the inauguration of the Iranian president. They've done it in Tehran. And of course, this is a massive provocation combined with the attacks on Beirut and on Hezbollah. It seems to set the scene for a wider war in the Middle East, with the ultimate objective being a conflict with Iran, which the Israelis want to expand into a conflict that will involve the United States. That, it seems to me, has been the Israeli objective all along. This is what they've been working towards because it is the only way they can win. In
Mhm.
every other respect, they're losing, and they know it.
And in the meantime, I think the US is not making things better. I mean, John Kirby, just the other day, he accused the protesters when Netanyahu was visiting, though, of course, there are protesters outside. And he claimed Iran is somehow partially sponsoring some of the protesters with no evidence. Why did he say something like that? I mean, it's only making things worse and it's baseless.
It is absolutely baseless. I mean, if you make an allegation of that kind, you need to back it up with facts, especially if you're an American official. If you're a member of a government and you make that kind of an allegation, notice a smear directed at America's own citizens, young people who are protesting in universities and those sort of places. It's an outrageous thing to say. And it's amazing that there hasn't been more pushback and criticism of it. There's no evidence for it at all. And as you absolutely correctly say, it is immensely provocative. And there have been other things that the US has been saying. So Tony Blinken, who's just been to China, by the way, he's just met, or I don't know whether he's been in China, but he just met with Wang Yi
Wang
and
Yi, yeah.
apparently had a very difficult meeting. Yeah.
Mhm.
But anyway, Tony Blinken has gone out and said that Iran is 1 to 2 weeks away
Mhm.
from assembling enough enriched uranium to make a nuclear bomb, which
Yeah.
is, again, an incredibly alarming and alarmist statement when US intelligence is itself saying at the present time that Iran shows no sign of seeking to develop a nuclear bomb. But why say it? And you're absolutely correct. You get the sense that some of the more hardline figures within the administration are also taking advantage of the vacuum of power that now exists in order to escalate the situation, to push us even further into this massive confrontation between Israel and the United States on the one hand, and Iran on the other, which no one in their right minds should want.
Yeah, and you're right. There is a vacuum, power vacuum in the U.S. right now because in the Chinese media, people are saying who is really in charge right now
Mm,
because Biden is a slam dunk, right? And so because he's on his way out, and
mm,
Kamala Harris, first of all, she's not the president, right? She's the
mm.
vice president and a nominee for something. But in general, she just not doesn't have the power, doesn't have the clout, I would say, to make any important decision. But somehow she's now more active because she's the vice president
Mm.
and then presumptive, Democratic nominee. And then, of course, Trump, who is also the former president, and then also seems like he's likely to win. I mean, despite all these, I don't trust all those pollings. Most people still believe
Mm.
he will be the winner. So he's also very active as well. So who is really making the decision? Who is in charge right now in the US?
I suspect that nobody is, and this is the problem. Straightforwardly, Biden himself cannot exercise the full functions of the presidency. Even if he was a well man, which he is not, the way in which he has been maneuvered out of power will have destroyed his authority. Every single official across the US government knows that in a few months he will be out, and not only that he is going to go out, but that he has lost the confidence of his own party. And in fact, if you've noticed, we've heard very little from him since he made that announcement the other day. All he's come up with is a half-baked idea to reform the Supreme Court, which I mean, is hardly the most important topic one would have thought at this particular moment in time. So he is essentially an invisible figure. And besides, why would he really want to take charge? I mean, he knows that he's not going to be president for very long. I can't imagine him making any serious decisions. Now, it's been widely believed for a very long time that the person who really makes the major foreign policy decisions on a day-to-day basis is his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. But we have now heard that Jake Sullivan himself is going to be out in a few months. So, if you're talking about the bureaucracy, if you're talking about the officials in the Pentagon and the State Department and in all of those places, they get instructions, so called instructions, from Jake Sullivan. But Jake Sullivan isn't the president.
Mm.
He is acting on the authority of a president that everybody knows is about to go. And everybody knows that Jake Sullivan himself is about to go. So they will simply ignore whatever orders or instructions he gives them that they want to ignore. So, in this kind of situation, you have a complete vacuum of power in the United States. Every part of this enormous overcomplicated bureaucracy that the United States government has become is now going to be doing whatever it wants. They're each going to be working towards their own objectives, and they're not going to be paying any attention to what is coming out of the White House and the Oval Office and the West Wing and the Executive Office building, because they know that the people who are there really are, hollow people. They have no real power. So I don't think anybody's in charge of the United States at this time. If I was Xi Jinping and I wanted to telephone the White House, find out from the United States who to speak to, I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and and at the same time, because of that, it could be dangerous, right? Because nobody is in charge. So anybody can take advantage of that. Like you said, the hardliners, and there are people within the US government always want to have a war with Iran, for example. I mean, they could seize the opportunity and do something extremely dangerous. And then before we know it, it just happens. And then everybody just got shocked. That's a possibility, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly what's happening now. That is, I mean, by Netanyahu, who, of course, when he was first invited to come to the United States, the circumstances were completely different. But by the time he got there, he understood fully the depth of the political crisis in Washington and the fact that the Biden administration, was collapsing. He seized the opportunity. And as I said, you saw that in the speech that he gave in Congress. And he's now taking the initiative and he's dictating the course of events in the Middle East. And you can see that he's got allies in the administration, people like Kirby, probably, people like Blinken, conceivably. And he also has, no doubt, opponents. But the opponents no longer have the authority of the presidency, which they could use to restrain him. So he is doing what he can to shape events in the Middle East whilst this time window is open to him. He knows that in November, the election in the United States will be concluded. We will then have a president elect whoever that is. And that person might then have ideas, which might not be the ideas that Netanyahu himself has. So he's using that time window to shape events in the hope that within that time he can move his agenda forward, get the Americans involved in a conflict with Iran, and then the new president, whoever he is or she
Mhm.
is faced with in effect a fait accompli, and that's exactly what he's doing. And it
Yeah.
is extremely dangerous. And a
Yes.
vacuum of power in any country, but especially a superpower like the United States, is by definition extremely dangerous.
Yeah. We'll just have to see. Maybe next week when we talk, something happened. We will see.
Yeah.
Um, okay, this conversation, this meeting between Wang Yi and Blinken, like you said, I also got the feeling it's a difficult meeting.
Mm,
But then again, I think it has been, I think the Chinese government has realized that for some time now that it's not possible to work with the Biden administration. And in particular now that they are out. So I find like the conversation is they lay out the differences. Both sides seem to lay out the
mm,
differences
yeah.
and has no agreement on anything, right? Is that your impression?
That was exactly my impression. The big question um, is why this meeting took place at all. I mean, I assume it must have been set up before the political developments, the recent political developments in the United States. But what basically happened was that Blinken came along. It's never clear what Blinken's purposes are because, he's probably not fully understood the extent to which the ground has basically collapsed underneath him. But Wang Yi was giving absolutely, he was giving no ground. I mean, as far as I could see, reading the Chinese readout, he just tore into Blinken. I mean, when I say that, I mean obviously he's a diplomat. He's one of the
Yeah.
world's most experienced diplomats. He's not going to bang the table or raise his voice or done any of those things. He'll have spoken in a very calm, measured, polite way. But in terms of what he said, the substance of what he said, exactly as you said, he will have laid it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and then from the U.S. readout is pretty much they recognize as such, right? There's
Mm,
just the
mm,
differences, but I don't see
mm.
any progress has been made, and I guess nobody expects any progress for the remaining of the Biden term, right? Because it's an organization that is in disarray, So and and then
Exactly. I mean, we had that summit meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden back in San Francisco. It seems like an age ago.
yeah,
Nothing that appeared to have been agreed then has really
yeah,
borne fruit in any significant way. And I think by now the Chinese understand that. And they understand that there's no real point wasting time with this administration because, as you rightly say, it's departing the scene.
yeah. And by the way, the also the Chinese media pointed out that Biden would be the first president who hasn't visited China during his term, ever since Nixon, I think, for the past 40, 50 years. That's pretty significant, I think.
I hadn't thought of that, but that is absolutely correct. That is astonishing, actually.
Yeah. And
That is remarkable. That shows well, I mean, it shows a degree of disdain
mhm,
and I have to say hostility that is really quite extraordinary. I mean, given how important the relationship with China is for the United States, I mean, it ought to have been the first country he visited, or at least, if not the first country, one of the very first countries he visited. If you remember, even Donald Trump,
yeah,
he didn't go to China, but one of the first people he met was Xi Jinping. He hosted him in Mar-a-Lago. So I mean and that, by the way, where it was a friendly meeting, as I remember. I mean, this is really extraordinary. It shows how hostile to China
yeah.
Biden basic viscerally is.
Yeah, and instead of having Nancy Pelosi go visit Taipei, why didn't Biden go visit Beijing, right? And
Not quite.
and Barack Obama visited China 3 times.
Yeah.
Even though Barack Obama wasn't particularly friendly towards China either, but
No.
at least he tries to, have some communications, you trying to
Yeah.
show some friendly side, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And Biden doesn't even do that. So that's
Correct. I have to say I hadn't noticed. It's one of the things I usually do notice, but I hadn't noticed this. And as I said, it's absolutely staggering. Actually, it's an
yeah,
astonishing thing, and it's a massive indictment of the Biden administration's conduct of diplomacy um, that they should have failed in this obvious and simple way.